remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hi, my name is Wendy Painting, and I have a question. It's actually a couple questions. So, if most of lore goes back to Nazi race science propaganda, where does interdimensional Bigfoot fit in? So, popular shows like Missing 411, David Paulides, tie Sasquatch to alien abductions. And there's a long history of racists and outright fascists like William Grimstead and British Naval Intelligence Officer Ivan T. Sanderson, for example, being involved in cryptozoology. Is Bigfoot a Nazi psyop? Or have these gentle giants been appropriated by Hitlerite mind war operatives? Could it have anything to do with theozoology? What do you think? I don't know.
Thank you for that question, Wendy. I'm happily surprised that you listened to the show. I didn't know that. That's great. And yes, what a good question. I didn't find any... I did find quite a lot of things about the Bigfoots, but I found an even better story about their distant cousins, the Yetis. Now, this is closer to my own mythology, like the mythology that I grew up with. Bigfoot and Sasquatch came much later. I think those are generally American, right? But I think this answer will not disappoint you. It's a rather long answer. It might be the entire episode, I'm not sure. But what initially caught my attention, rainy late night, trying to come up with an answer, was the title of a really old anti-communist book, which my father gave to me many years ago when I came back from China once to tell the good news about the dictatorship of the peasantry and the proletariat. It was The Long Walk by Slavomir Ravich, which came out a generation before the Gulag Archipelago, already in the 1950s, when it became a first popular milestone in British anti-communist literature. The Swedish title is the even more bait-friendly The Escape from Stalin's Camp. And as I dug deeper, I found out that the book is mentioned and cited in over 10 other of the last century's big books, which are explicitly about Yeti and Bigfoot, as well as general anthologies of cryptozoology. The book was made into a film by Peter Weir called The Way Back, which stars both Colin Farrell and Ed Harris, as well as one of the Skarsgård brothers. So, already you can tell it's a pretty high production thing. And Peter has made films such as Master and Commander, The Truman Show, Dead Poets Society, etc. All very good films. But The Way Back is also approvingly described by critics as starkly anti-communist and pro-freedom. Whatever that might mean. Well, they're escaping from a prison, I guess. I get what it means, but still. Of course, it is a common trait to see relatively balanced directors of the Western culture industry suddenly turn anti-communist when they get the chance. Most often, I think they are unconsciously reproducing an ideology that just sells. However, I have a theory that one major reason for this non-awareness is that members of the intelligentsia, which we call artists, such as directors and film actors, are systematically kept drunk on various outlandish forms of spiritualism. I mean, how else does one explain the extreme frequency of Scientology in Hollywood, for example? This is, in my opinion, a very effective method of occulting any politico-economic realism that might make it into any blockbuster films that is to undergo global mass reproduction. Peter Weir is not a Scientologist. He is, as was noted in a book called Bible in Motion, a handbook of the Bible and its reception in film, quote, ostensibly a non-religious filmmaker, end of quote. Yet, they go on, quote, Weir frequently employs Christian symbolism, sacred subtexts, and scripture quoting throughout his oeuvre, along with Aboriginal tribal religion, New Age references, Tibetan Buddhism, Hinduism, Indonesian spirituality, etc., as appropriate, end of quote. Now, this is not necessarily a thought-out strategy on Peter Weir's part, I think. My allegations of his recruitment are mainly, as with most famous directors, again, as I said, that of unconscious ideological reproduction. Nonetheless, let's take a look at the book, The Long Walk, to see if I can begin to answer your question. It was released in 1952, just as the tone of the Cold War was being set. I'll repeat myself to recount that this is a generation before Alexander Solzhenitsyn would enter the scene to bust the ghost of the 68, and I have seen it being said, though not in words that I'm about to put, that The Long Walk was for the tradition of anti-communism of the 50s what that fictitious Gulag archipelago was for the 70s. In a book called Looking for Mr. Smith, The Quest for the Truth Behind the Long Walk, the greatest survival story ever told, published in 2010, being the result of decades-long research of tracking down the authenticity of Ravich's story, Linda Willis tells us that, quote, looking at old book reviews from 1956, the one word or phrase that appeared in all of the reviews was either Yeti or abominable snowman. Now one can question the veracity of Yeti sightings and still speculate on the creature's existence. Basing a true story around the central theme of escape and flight and throwing in comments about Yetis does cause the reader, never mind the critics, to pause and question the truthfulness of the storyteller. End of quote. This might appear odd at first glance, because precisely as Willis points out, why add something as problematic as Himalayan mysticism to a story which already sounds unbelievable? Well, contradiction is, as I am not the only one to point out, not a hindrance to ideology, it is the very propeller that pushes it forward. I think it establishes, in this case, on its own terms, a mysterious lacuna, a backdrop of the highest phantasmatic aspirations of the id, and against its contrast, the spectre of anti-communism appears quite tangible, relatively real, so to speak. Here is a sample from the part of the story that speaks of the Yeti. In all our wanderings through the Himalayan region, we had encountered no other creature than man, dogs, and sheep. It was with quickening interest, therefore, that in the early stages of our descent of this last mountain, Kolemenos drew our attention to two moving black specks against the snow about a quarter of a mile below us. We thought of animals and immediately of food, but as we set off down to investigate, we had no great hopes that they would await our arrival. The contours of the mountain temporarily hid them from view as we approached nearer, but when we halted on the edge of a bluff, we found they were still there, 12 feet or so below us and about 100 yards away. 2 points struck me immediately. They were enormous, and they walked on their hind legs. The picture is clear in my mind, fixed there indelibly by a solid 2 hours of observation. We just could not believe what we saw at first, so we stayed to watch. Somebody talked about dropping down to their level to get a close-up view. Zaro said, "They look strong enough to eat us." We stayed where we were. We weren't too sure of unknown creatures which refused to run away at the approach of men. I set myself to estimating their height on the basis of my military training for artillery observation. They could not have been much less than 8 feet tall. One was a few inches taller than the other, in the relation of the average man to the average woman. They were shuffling quietly around on a flattish shelf which formed part of the obvious route for us to continue our descent. We thought that if we waited long enough they would go away and leave the way clear for us. It was obvious they had seen us, and it was equally apparent they had no fear of us. The American said that eventually he was sure we should see them drop on all fours like bears, but they never did. Their faces I could not see in detail, but the heads were squarish and the ears must lie close to the skull because there was no projection from the silhouette against the snow. The shoulders sloped sharply down to a powerful chest. The arms were long and the wrists reached the level of the knees. Seen in profile, the back of the head was a straight line from the crown into the shoulders. Like a damned Preussian, as Paul Shovich put it. We decided unanimously that we were examining a type of creature of which we had no previous experience in the wild, in zoos or in literature. It would have been easy to have seen them waddle off at a distance and dismiss them as either bears or big ape of the orangutan species. At close range they defied facile description. There was something both of the bear and the ape about their general shape, but they could not be mistaken for either. The color was a rusty kind of brown. They appeared to be covered by 2 distinct kinds of hair. The reddish hair which gave them their characteristic color forming a tight, close fur against the body, mingling with which were long, loose, straight hairs hanging downwards, which had a slight greyish tinge as the light caught them. Dangling our feet over the edge of the rock, we kept them closely under observation for about an hour. They were doing nothing but move around slowly together, occasionally stopping to look around them like people admiring a view. Their heads turned towards us now and again, but their interest in us seemed to be of the slightest. Then Zaro stood up. "We can't wait all day for them to make up their minds to move. I am going to shift them." He went off into a pantomime of arm waving, red Indian war dancing, bawling and shrieking. The things did not even turn. Zaro scratched around and came up with 6 pieces of ice, about a 1/4 inch thick. One after another he pitched them down towards the pair, but they skimmed erratically and lost direction. One missile kicked up a little powder of snow about 20 yards from them, but if they saw it, they gave no sign. Zaro sat down again, panting. We gave them another hour, but they seemed content to stay where they were. I got the uncomfortable feeling they were challenging us to continue our descent across their ground. "I think they are laughing at us," said Zaro. Mr. Smith stood up. "It occurs to me they might take it into their heads to come up and investigate us. It is obvious they are not afraid of us. I think we had better go while we are safe." We pushed off around the rock and directly away from them. I looked back and the pair were standing still, arms swinging slightly, as though listening intently. What were they? For years they remained a mystery to me, but since recently I have read of scientific expeditions to discover the abominable snowman of the Himalayas, and studied descriptions of the creature given by native hillmen. I believe that on that day we may have encountered 2 of the animals. I do insist, however, that the recent estimates of their height as about 5 feet must be wrong. The minimum height of a well-grown specimen must be around 7 feet. I think that in causing a deviation of route, they brought our final disaster upon us. End of quote. If this was a mere literary review, I would give this passage 4 out of 5 for Yeti lore ambience. But this is an answer to a complex question by Wendy Painting. Thus I will instead point out something that might give credence to my overall analysis, which is that the book The Long Walk was actually not written by Slavomir Ravic, but by a ghostwriter of the Daily Mail, the arch-conservative newspaper of the middle-class Britons. Quote, "This newspaper had been Fleet Street's most ardent ideological opponent of international communism in the 1930s and onwards, viewing it as an even greater threat than Nazism." End of quote. Says Tony Shaw of Lancaster University in his The British Popular Press and the Early Cold War. Which is not surprising, since Harold Sidney Harmsworth I, Viscount Rothermere, the paper's owner, was openly in support of fascism and praised Nazism as well as the British Union of Fascists, which all in all contributed to the popularity of those views in the 1930s, as the tabloid's own popularity would eventually make it the first British paper to reach 1 million sold copies in a day, though I'm not sure when exactly that benchmark was reached. Safe to say is that already in 1946 the Daily Mail was describing Stalin as a Hitlerist. So how then did this fascist British paper create the popular connection between Yeti and anti-communism in the 50s? Well, in her book, Willis tells us further. During 1954, the Daily Mail in England decided to sponsor a trip to the Himalayas, the Yeti Everest expedition, in search of the abominable snowman. Sir Ralph Izard, who had covered the Everest expedition in 1953 for the Daily Mail, was put in charge of the Yeti search. I watched the documentary as a young schoolgirl on my family's very small television screen, and I remember being thrilled by the adventure of it all. One of the people instrumental in getting that expedition off the ground was a journalist working for the Daily Mail named Ronald Downing. Downing had been a journalist before the war, and after 1939 had entered the military as a Royal Navy officer, who served on a variety of ships in and around home waters while continuing to pursue journalistic duties for the war effort and the British government. I think she is saying that he was a propaganda minister of some kind, or a propaganda officer. Anyway, those duties included an opportunity to go along on one of the Normandy landings and report on what he saw. After the war, Downing returned to journalism full-time at the Daily Mail. It was during 1954, with the increasing interest in Mount Everest, that word trickled down through contacts, either in the field of journalism or through returned servicemen. Again, she might be speaking about some intelligence connections here. That there was someone living in the English Midlands who had been through an incredible adventure, including sightings of abominable snowmen. The subsequent collaboration between Ronald Downing, an experienced journalist, and Slavomir Ravic, an escaped convict and survivor, resulted in one of the most gripping true adventure stories of the last century. The Long Walk was printed in early 1956 and has never been out of print since. End of quote. The plot thickens when we find out that the British man who received the supposed escapees from the Soviet Gulag in India at the end of their journey, as the story goes from there on, was an intelligence officer called Rupert Mayne, who was, according to veterans, on the G2 staff during the retreat from Burma. Which is extra odd, since as far as I know that is an American spook apparatus and not a British one. Furthermore, its chief was the infamous anti-communist and MacArthur's quote-unquote lovable fascist, originally from Germany, Charles A. Willoughby, who we met in the Unit 731 episodes of the Peace and Biowarfare series. Other investigators have claimed that Rupert Mayne was of the Inter-Service Liaison Department, a cover name employed by the British Secret Intelligence Service in the Middle East and Asia during World War II, or that he worked for Force 136, which was a Far Eastern branch of another British World War II intelligence organization, the Special Operations Executive, or the SOE. It was originally set up in 1941 as the India Mission, with the cover name of GSIK within parentheses, which would go on to absorb what was left of SOE's Oriental Mission in April 1942. The organization was established to encourage and supply indigenous resistance movements in enemy-occupied territory and occasionally mount clandestine sabotage operations. Force 136 operated in the regions of the Southeast Asian theater of World War II, which were occupied by Japan from 1941 to 1945. Burma, Malaya, China, Sumatra, Siam, and French Indochina. If the modus operandi here sounds all too familiar to you, Wendy and my other American listeners, Force 136 mascot was fittingly enough a phoenix. Yeah, that most grotesquely appropriated cryptozoological creature. Eventually in the investigation we do get hardcore evidence that Mayne was indeed an intelligence operative, as he had donated a total of 4 of his file folders back in the early 1980s to the Cambridge Museum of Military Intelligence. Almost every scrap of paper in them was marked classified or top secret. Although the rule was that files such as these should have been turned over to the proper authorities at the end of the war, and Mayne was a stickler for proper procedure and hid behind the Official Secrets Act for decades. On this occasion, he went against all the rules and kept those files in his possession for nearly 40 years. We might wonder why he chose to do that. And if you do wonder in the same way as I did, you will now also come to the same unfortunate realization as I did, since as Willis says, quote, "The disappointment I encountered, however, was that the papers in the files he had donated only began in mid-1942. Any interviews or interrogations of the men of the Long Walk would have taken place earlier, but there were no reports from an earlier time." End of quote. Thus we are forced to keep wondering why Rupert Mayne chose to withhold the years when he supposedly met and interviewed what would become the world's most famous Gulag escapees on a journey from Siberia to India. Additional related answer to one of your questions, Wendy, regarding Jörg von Lantz, the author of Theozoology, is that your suspicion is correct. Of course he is all over the field of cryptozoology. He speaks about dragons having existed, giants, even a lemur Bigfoot. Whether it lived in Lemuria, he does not say, but he does say that they exist in Madagascar. My ultimate aim, however, is to show that he is somehow perhaps not only the man who brought Hitler in contact with anti-Semitism, which is Wilfred Dime's take, but also that he is the father of the ancient aliens narrative, though in a very crude form. Dime writes that, quote, Lance thinks that the writings of the ancients were written in a kind of secret language that first had to be decoded. Through this decoding of the Bible and many other works, Lance arrives at the most fantastic results. If, for example, one declares the word stone to be the biblical secret word for chandalas, or halflings, or those lowest caste creatures which he is so terrified of, and the word angel to be the secret word for Aryo-heroics, then of course the sentence, quote within a quote, the angel rolled away the stone, end of quote within a quote, means something completely different than one would assume. Namely, the Aryo-heroic, within brackets, angel created the chandalas, within brackets, stone. In another place, Lance later writes, quote within quote, every Bible word, for example, therefore has a threefold meaning. A, or 1, a radical historical and racial economic one. 2, a racial moral one. 3, a racial mystical sense. End of Lance quote within the quote. It is relatively easy to interpret the Bible in a way that suits one's needs, because there are a lot of words in the Bible. Now, it is extremely difficult to simply present the basic ideas of theosology because they are so confusing and partly contradictory. But at least we want to try. The theosology is the first summary of Lance's conception of the world. It begins with the primordial beginning, the old covenant and the old God, and ends with the conception of an immortal church of the gods. Next to Aryo-heroic man, it is the ape that seems to give him, as well as the geneticist, the most information about the origins of history. If we simplify a little, according to theosology, there was an original dialectic between the gods, Asana, and the demons. Accordingly, the gods are, and Lance quote here, older ancestral forms of the human race. End of Lance quote within the quote. They were now endowed with special abilities. They were supermen with special electrical organs, which now, after the fall, have atrophied. So the gods of their special graces went amiss. And I'll just add my own commentary here, like in the middle of this long quote by Dime and Lance, that it's possible that they originally came from the stars, according to Lance, that is, of course. I'm not speculating in these terms, but for the sake of my own theory, right? But it's hard to tell with Lance, since star is one of the words that have, for him, many meanings, such as, for example, angel or Aryan hero. Furthermore, he says at another point that the gods were living electrical power and transmitting stations. End of quote. So, not that they were that themselves. Like that can mean some kind of a starship then. If we use both his own translations and what he says, right? Like living electrical power and transmitting stations. So, okay, I will continue now with the long quote. They were at war with the demonozoon. So this is a cryptozoological term which he invents. And these are creatures with which the Aryan starmen or angels, then the heroes, the electrical heroes, they had to control. They were biological monsters, such as dragons. And I'll add here that there seems to be some kind of intelligent reptilian overlord the more you read him, etc. These gods apparently came into being through a biological development aimed directly at man. So again, this sounds a lot like the contemporary theories about the Anunnakis, right? That seldomly get mixed up with Nazi theory, but clearly there is some connection.
According to an ancient Jewish interpretation of the Bible, known as the Kabbalah, Adam was created from a human-like race that already existed on Earth. There are some who believe this points to the genetic engineering of Homo sapiens, and that further manipulation of human DNA can be found in the biblical story of the Garden of Eden.
Let's look then at the story of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, living sort of blissfully in this Edenic garden. And then suddenly this serpent being comes to them and offers them some special food to eat.
Who is this serpent? Ancient legend tells us that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was actually a humanoid form. It stood erect, had arms, and had legs, and clearly it spoke. The serpent talks to Eve and says, hey, have a piece of fruit. Eve eats, Adam too.
And suddenly they completely change into what we would call modern people who are now creating clothing, creating ornaments. They're building houses and vehicles, tools and things like that. We have, in a sense, an evolutionary leap from primitive humans to more modern humans who are more aware of themselves and their surroundings.
According to ancient astronaut theorists, strikingly similar creation myths exist in ancient cultures around the world. For instance, Mayan tradition describes how humans were created by a feathered serpent known as Kukulkan. And ancient Chinese stories portray the first emperor, Huang Di, as the offspring of a human woman and a dragon god who descended from the sky. But perhaps most remarkable of all is the creation story of the Sumerians, who are believed by most mainstream archaeologists to be the earliest human civilization on Earth. Approximately 4,000 years ago, the Sumerians recorded stories about powerful beings called the Anunnaki, who descended to Earth from the sky. One of these figures was known as Enki. And according to author Zecharia Sitchin, who spent years studying the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, Enki is the equivalent of the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
Enki is the god of technology of the Anunnaki. Zecharia Sitchin noticed that Enki was symbolized by a serpent, and he made the simple leap to suggest that he, in fact, is the serpent in the Garden of Eden that was responsible for putting us on our current path of evolution. Enki altered our human DNA in order to awaken us and to illuminate us. Ancient astronaut theory proposes that this actually is extraterrestrial intervention, that as the Egyptian and Sumerian stories tell us, beings came from other worlds and activated that part of our brain that makes us human.
With the innumerable animal species representing side branches of humanity. I mean, so that's just insane. Like every other species on this planet have evolved from humans, or like the original humans then, the original Aryans. I go on. They tended towards pure breeding, with the temptation being the fascination for intermingling with the demonozoan, the apes, etc. And now men violated the law of the pure fruit, and Eve, the woman, became involved with the devil, a demonozoan, and begat with him hybrids between animal and human. So again, even the devil is some kind of reptilian, intelligent demonozoan. Because the mating occurred between animal and human, quote within quote now, it becomes clear what the original sin was that passed into the blood of man. It was sodomy. End of quote. End of Lance's quote. Sin came into the world through the woman, and it is always so, because women are particularly addicted to the animal and inferior arts of love. for they are the ones who are the most vulnerable. And Lance clarifies why he thinks that by saying that the woman has the instinctive urges to breed away the race. Sodomy, since it supplies the marmosets, and again, this is another word for monkey found in South America. It's like those silk monkeys, the really small ones. So he just, he has, I don't know how many, at least 10, I think, that I found, where he uses different words for different monkeys, and that's just like a slur. So yeah, since it supplies the marmosets with blonde blue blood, makes them particularly dangerous, since it makes them more intelligent. So, and here comes a long quote by Lance within this quote: today's colored human races are nothing other than udumi, monkeys, bred up by Homo heroicus. They are just as dangerous to all sons of Logos today as they were in primordial times. By their arts of love they ensnare us, breed themselves up and us down. End of Lance's quote within the quote. World history is full of the conflict-ridden drama between the true gods, the good race, and the idols, the animal man gods. Lance translates the first commandment of God, according to Lance, the great Electrozo, the primordial father who still had electrobiological powers. So that's who God is, if you didn't know that. You shall have no animal man gods in my place. Yeah, that's how we should really read that first commandment. All pagan gods are demons. They are beast men. And here comes a long quote from Lance. They were beasts of Sodom, with whom whoredoms were made. The struggle. The struggle against the descendants of the Demonozoan, the Sodom beasts, against the marmosets, is always also a struggle for the blonde women, whom the marmosets strive to steal from the blonde arioheroics, and often succeed in doing so by virtue of the peculiarity of women. And if you, like me, wonder what is this peculiarity of women, it is, he tells us later, or he tells us that he has found out that when a wife breaks marriage, she almost always commits adultery with a man of a lower race than her husband. Okay, of course, that is statistically proven. I wonder where he found that out.
What is your major malfunction, numbnuts? Didn't Mommy and Daddy show you enough attention when you were a child?
Oh, okay, we go on here. The Bible now opposes the racial decay with its ethical norms, as we could see in Moses' first commandment. The aim, quote, purpose and content of the covenant is extermination of the animal man and development of the higher new man, end of quote. Okay. In contrast to this, Lance shows that through pure breeding, the gods that live on in human beings and, quote, slumbers in the fleshly coffins of human bodies, end of quote, within the quote, will arise again. So it is now a matter of breeding the breed up again, for which the order of the Landsliebenfelds was created after the Catholic Church, in his view, became unfaithful to its mission. Now comes an, quote, immortal church of the gods, end of quote, which frees itself from the downward pulling embrace of the primordial races, and with the fallen god rises again. The, quote, new human race now developing out of the arioheroic race, end of quote, will again possess the old divine, quote, electromagnetic radiological organs, and with the help of these become all-knowing, all-wise, all-powerful, and, as in primordial times, revive the whole earth with its flora and fauna, end of quote. So Dime finishes eventually by saying, we have simplified somewhat here, but the crooked paths of Liebenfeld's thinking can only be fully followed by those who actually read the Theozoology. Perhaps this can suffice for the time being, end of quote. And I too hope that was a sufficient answer to you, Wendy. And I hope you now never have to read Lance's book, and that you instead get to continue your very important research work. But there is a little crux, right? I think I told you this on Twitter, that I found that there is a pretty good connection from Lance to some of the people who will become the big ex-Annennerbe publishers after the war, who were, and I'm gonna tell this story, at greater length in the episode on the Stargate conspiracy with Reed and Colin, regarding how it seems that this group, and there's a lot of suspicion surrounding, just how they survived. I have a few answers, but just to tease a little bit, they were together they were setting up, as far as I understand it, one of those first esoteric Hitlerist American publishing groups later. Like, this was an offshoot of the so-called Landig group. According to a Swedish researcher, this is where I got this from, and they were the first to publish the Turner Diaries, which McVeigh found so interesting. So yes, I will leave you with that little tidbit. I think you're the best person to tell that too, and I hope that the two answers, that you like them, and yes, thanks again for the questions. It was a lot of fun answering them, I have to say. Ta-ta, see you later.
M-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E, Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse. Forever let us hold our banner high, 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 high. Boys and girls from far and near, you're welcome as can be. M-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E. Who's the leader of the club that's made for you?
My thoughts drift back to erect nipple wet dreams about Mary Jane Rottencrotch and the great homecoming fuck fantasy. I am so happy that I am alive, in one piece and short. I'm in a world of shit, yes, but I am alive, and I am not afraid.
M-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E. Who's the leader of the club that's made for you and me? M-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E. Hey there, hi there, ho there, you're as welcome as can be. M-I-C-K-E-Y.
Hello, Marcus. Hello, dear listeners. This is Fergal Schmoodlock of the Kingless Generation podcast. I had some trouble thinking of a suitably open-ended question, but it was staring me right in the face. What are some Japan-related lifestyle habits, recent discoveries? Do you go to bathhouses? Do you climb mountains? Do you have some cuisine that you're into these days? Do you have an exercise regimen? Do you go swimming in rivers? How are the Japanese in-laws? Have you had any kind of culture shock moments lately? That sort of thing. How about that?
Hello, Fergal. Nice to hear from you. Been listening now to the your new spook, Weeb Spy series about Ivan Morris and Mishima, the most loved. Well, your take is that he's a Western occultist rather than a Japanese nationalist fascist, which, yeah, makes sense, honestly. I don't know too much about him, but, like, even in Sweden, leftist weeps will like him, or like, you know, at least think he's fascinating. That's sort of his shtick, isn't it? It's like nobody really likes him. It's just sort of, he's fascinating, you know. It's sort of like the bad boy. Yeah, I have read a long time ago one of the texts that you talked about the aesthetics, right? The aesthetics of killing, or I can't really remember what it's called, but you know, he has this shtick again about how Japanese fascism, you know, was you know, it was a different kind of fascism than the Nazi one, because, you know, it's unaesthetical basically to gas people. It's much cooler if you sort of cut their guts open with a katana, right? I don't know. Maybe we can start there for my answer. That well, katanas, like, you know, this sort of fascination with sort of male phallocentric discourse in Japan. It is a very patriarchal society, especially on the countryside. It looks almost like the 50s in the West, you know. You know, even in the summer, you don't see too many ankles or bare shoulders. Not that that's necessarily an expression for or about female emancipation, but I mean, there's so much housewives just in general, like this housewife culture, which is completely, or has completely died out, at least in Scandinavia, which just, I don't know, and it's wrong, I think, for me to be like bothered with the women who represent it, because of course, you know, they're just playing the game, right? Like, that's been, you know, why would you start? It's the easiest game, so, you know, might as well play that if you're gonna play any game. But so much, I really don't know where I'm going with this. Honestly, this is such a free, because you always do like sort of freewheeling episodes. So I thought I wouldn't write anything down. I'd just answer what your question without thinking too much. And here my thoughts, my wandering thoughts leads me. I think it's just, it's this, you know, the system. I'm not gonna be annoyed with her. She's just a symptom, but the system produces a kind of sort of bourgeois family, you know, nuclear family neurosis that I haven't been exposed to for such a long time. It's not even like, you know, it's not really like that in China either, because in China at least the families are big. You know, there'll be like tight, like sort of family connections, and it's somewhat similar in Sweden too. It's breaking down in Sweden, like, you know, people don't even have families anymore, really, like, except the bourgeois family. But it used to be, when I grew up, at least, we had big family gatherings, and it was quite nice, you know, 50 to 70 people coming together once or twice a year. You know, people who you have really no reason to talk to, like no professional incentives, no extra social incentives, because it doesn't really matter, you know, you're gonna be there next time anyway. It's not like there's a filter, you know, like, are you gonna be invited to the party or you're not gonna be invited to the party? You will be invited to the party. So that aspect of like family gatherings, I think, is crucial. Like, you know, it's simply social conversation for the sake of social conversation somehow. There is nothing more to it. And I remember appreciating that a lot when I was growing up. And in China, it's very similar. Like, most friends I, you know, were close enough to be invited, you know, to their family dinners and stuff for maybe New Year or some particular full moon festival or mooncake festival, or different particular Chinese festivities when they would get together. And even on a daily basis, they get together, you know, it'll be like a Friday dinner and it'll be like 12 or 18 people around the table. And I also appreciated that so much, because it's something, as I already said, you know, it's something very different from everyday life, of political and like sort of social intrigue, of being better than others, or, you know, trying to get something out of something, you know, this extractive mindset of obviously capital exploitation, and in Japan I feel it's just the closest family. There might be a grandmother and a grandfather involved, but most of the time maybe not even that. And it's I'm not sure really, like what's it doing, how does it work. I think in many ways, I say in Japan, but it's just a really like much higher degree of capital modern development. There is nothing really Japanese about it, and maybe that's what's most terrifying about it. Again, back to the uncanny. There's something here which isn't of any of ours, our cultures. It's not an American thing, it's not a North European thing, it's not a Japanese thing, but we are just becoming more and more isolated. And it really terrifies me the way they accept it here, or almost fetishizes it. Like a few things, culture shock things that I can pick out particularly is how people always pull the blinds here, like for the windows or the curtains, and so there are almost never any spontaneous social interactions of just walking around in your village or your city, because nobody can see in and nobody can see out. Everybody's completely separated. There's this one friend of my partner, my wife, like an old high school friend, who doesn't do that. And so when we were still living there in her hometown, he was the only one that we would end up talking to over a period of a year or 1.5 years, so like spontaneously, not having set a meeting or anything, just walking past his house. He's sitting outside, maybe with his son or his wife, a friend of his or a friend of his wife, and maybe smoking, maybe having a drink, maybe sitting in the living room, but the curtains aren't pulled, and so you can sort of wave to each other. If you're in the mood for it, you might stop, you might have a conversation. It might last for 15 minutes, might last for half an hour, but it's just, that doesn't happen. And there's a related thing is there are almost no benches. In Sweden there are benches everywhere, and often people will sit outside, and maybe they don't want to talk, but you can just sit next to somebody who doesn't want to talk. At least that's something. Of course, I don't speak, as good Japanese as I speak Chinese, so this is an isolating factor for me as well. But I do try, like most of the time when talking, I usually tend to talk to people in shops and stuff. I always, well, not always, but many times I do have conversations with people in the convenience store or in a pharmacy or a supermarket or whatever. I like to learn like the name of people who I do end up, having social interaction with. Even though I never chose that, or they didn't choose it either. But yeah, and so the bench problem is like, it's also annoying for not only a social reason, but like you never end up having somewhere to sit. I find myself sitting often on like rocks and stuff, or on the bare ground, having a cigarette or drinking a beer on the weekend. And that pisses me off that there are no benches. Like there's so many good, beautiful, scenic spots, especially like parks and stuff. Like they put a lot of effort into sort of making the natural surrounding look good, I think, many times. And seldomly there's an opportunity to sort of appreciate it. There's a really like, there is no public space really. There isn't a lot of like. If I compare it to China is sort of made to force people to get together on, in situations that maybe they wouldn't want to. I remember like in the hospital, like when I got drip, you just sit in a big room with like 50 people on benches, like next to each other, surrounded by people, and it's like a very vulnerable position, right? Like because your arm is bare, your blood is dripping, and you something's coming into your blood, and you're looking around at people and they're undergoing the same procedure. And so it might feel alienating, but because you're in the same position, it just becomes so social, like 50 people, like that doesn't happen in Sweden either. Like you get your own sort of semi-private room, and there might be blinds like separating you from others, and what's the real point of that? Why should you be embarrassed about like being undergoing medical treatment. I remember like even one time when I was getting tested for like STDs, and just me standing in a queue with like 5 other people, and we're all there for the same reason. So like, pull down your pants. Let's see what you've been up to. And there's people, they're standing there. Like, you sort of had a blind, but like people were back, moving back and forth, having questions, coming and going, and there wasn't like, it. Of course, in the beginning, when you are used to like isolation, that feels awkward. But then, I'm not saying I got STD tested that many times that I got used to it, but but just that general vibe. Like, by the time I did have like one of those tests, I was already used to it, and it didn't feel strange that 4 men, elderly men or men my age, were sort of looking at my cock while a Q-tip was going into it. It didn't strike me as something strange. And here, that was in China, right? And here, even when you go to the restaurant often, especially in the restaurants where you'd sort of imagine that like now there's an opportunity to talk to people who you don't know, like a snack bar, for example, like where you don't come for family dinner, you come to have, a bit of snack and get drunk, right? And so in the West, we call those things pubs. So that when you do find yourself in such a public space with people of the same mindset, people who don't have any friends, still have the opportunity to talk to other people who might also not have any friends and things like that. But here it's like you all sit in your own booths, and it's just you and your chosen friends. And I don't know. It's there's a different sort of a relationship to isolation and private space, which is awkward sometimes. It becomes more awkward. The intention is to avoid awkwardness, right? I think. But because there is no sort of... Then every time you do meet people, there are so many rules, and people are afraid to make mistakes because there are no casual... I'm speaking in extreme terms. Of course, there are casual interactions, but they're limited. And so you have no practice ground in a way, and you also have no situations where, if you're just sitting next to somebody on a bench in public, who is to say how you ought to behave, and who is to say like what this conversation is supposed to be about. And when you meet for definite reasons, and when you've made a choice to meet somebody, then there is a definite reason of for the conversation to go a particular direction, and there are ways that you might assume that you should behave. And the pressure of socialization gets a lot, it gets tougher when there is a sort of contract of always scheduling your social interactions with other beings, with other social beings, other talking beings. So I think that's the biggest one. Now I have to go back and listen to what else you were asking me. Oh yeah, no, I do know. So you were asking like, so have you picked up like any nice sort of routines? I don't really have an exercise routine. I walk a lot. I walk sometimes like 2 hours a day. That's an exercise, I guess. I'm not really much of a gym guy. I was maybe in junior high school when I was playing football still, but I'm not much of that anymore. Do a lot of sitting. I used to have a temple here that I just went to because, again, it's nice to sit with other people as well. Like, I think sasan should be practiced with others. I can't really do that because it's too far away now, and it was too far away from the beginning, and it's complicated. I hope to get into sort of that a routine of practicing sasan with others again, but at least I do it myself. So yeah, that would be a long answer, I think, if I was to talk about like what that means and how that what that does for me. But I'll do that another time. I'll keep it casual now. So another thing is getting back to green tea is really nice. In China, of course, I drank a lot of tea. I really like oolong tea and pu'er tea, the fermented ones. I like the earthy taste, you know. And I like kombucha, which is another thing that doesn't happen here. Like in China, you just find yourself often sitting down having kombucha with people, especially in the south, like in Shantou. You can just walk past some people who are sitting and drinking outside on the street. And kombucha, for those who don't know, is a sort of it's wrong to call it a ceremony, because again, that sounds sort of like, you know, something very hyped up. What it really is just a sort of tea table that heats a pot so that it's, you know, it's hot all the time, and you drink from sort of almost shot glass sized teacups. So you just pour yourself one sip, you know, and then you might pour others as well. So you just sit there and you have something to do whilst having a conversation, and it's very inclusive. Like literally, you can walk down the street, at least in Shantou, Shanwei, Guangzhou over there. Maybe not, Guangzhou is a pretty big city, so maybe it would. But if you're in the suburbs, for sure, no problem. You know, strike up a conversation, and they'll invite you to sit down and you know, have a few cups. And that's nice, you know, that's lovely. Here it doesn't happen. You probably have to, you know, pay money, and it will be more ceremonious, you know, and it will be pretentious, and it will be like sort of this forced, you know, so forced. Everything's so forced. It's like, you know, you have to come in here and look now at the cherry trees. You have to come here now and appreciate things, and everything is, you know. Sometimes it works well. I think you should also have like sort of rituals. It's very important to sort of pay attention to things that you might miss because they just become routine. And the ritual is a great sort of way to eliminate the problems of routine, I think. And to that, you know, to the extent that is the way it functions, I think they do a great job of it here, of sort of making something beautiful out of something that wouldn't necessarily be beautiful in Sweden. Like, you know, a rock can be a piece of art here, just by the way that you light it up. And so I do also have a routine, a ritual of I like to visit temples and just walk around in like parks and stuff. I really like to do that. Sometimes when I do take walks, I like to see if there's some shrine or something, or a graveyard. I like graveyards a lot. Here they don't put so, like, they're often very compacted. There are some beautiful graveyards, but the modern version is sort of like a storage unit, right? Which you see that a little bit in Spain too, like Catholic graveyards, like of the modern kind of, they almost look like storage units to me. Just, you know, doors, like post boxes of people's ashes. Yeah. What other routines or, you know, daily rituals do I have? So now at least, now I'm back to getting back into fermentation again. I was last year doing kombucha, sourdough bread and kimchi, but then it just got too messy with the in-laws. But since now we have moved to this new nice place up in the mountain, I have more freedom, have a lot of rooms, have a lot of storage. I can leave things out. I don't have to, you know, assemble and put things out again. So it's really nice to just sit down and do fermentation, because it's like I'm looking at one right now. I have a heating mat next to my computer, and the sourdough is brewing in there. So hopefully I'll make a nice piece of bread later, because it's really cold here. That's another thing, right? Like, there's no central heating, and so the winter is, it hits you differently than in Sweden. The Swedish winter is drier and colder, much colder, but at least we have central heating, so you feel good when you're at home, when you're inside. I like to go to second-hand shops as well. That's like one of my favorite things to do. I got a really nice antique. I mean, here it's crazy. They throw away antiques that I know would be like easily $10,000, I think. some of the things I looked at last time I went, I'm quite confident. Like I have a somewhat distant relative, my father's cousin's husband. He works for one of the big. They're not together actually anymore. He's sort of crazy, but he worked for an auction shop, and I used to sit and talk to him a little bit about like, how that world functions. He was nice before he sort of turned weird, but I think like they throw away things because they really you know this much better than me, but they have like a big Japanese people really want to sort of imitate Western things. They really think it's in China. You don't have that in the same way. It's in a quirky way in China. Like they'll have respect for like Western things that they do like, but you can always sense that they sort of think it's a bit silly maybe, or like there's something quirky about the West in the case of the Chinese, I think. Which do right. I mean, they're much more experienced when it comes to like having an intact, lineage of civilization, and I don't know, like it's much older, right? And but here there is a sort of pathetic wish to imitate the West, and so they sort of look down upon Asian antiques that really scream, Oriental in its design. Whereas, of course, to me, and I'm sure it's to you, it's some of the most beautiful things that have ever been made. Like got for, and I'm not fucking with you, I got for $15. I got a piece of furniture, which is basically a drawer, I think at least 100 years old, made with without a single nail or a screw, and just beautiful piece of wood. It's a bit worn, but you can just sandpaper and paint it over, which I'm gonna do, like come spring. Outside has beautiful metal work, on every single corner, sort of put together. It's got handles on the side, so that you can carry it. Again, with sort of hand-made metal pieces. As well as for like the things that you pull at when you open each specific drawer, and there are sort of these stoppers as well, so that you can't force the drawer further into, and you can't force the shelf further into the drawer. So there's like a big circular, almost like medallion-looking piece that sort of stretches from the end of the shelf itself above, where it will push against once you push it into the drawer. And I guess I'll just have to take a picture of it eventually, but I got that for $15, and I think, I mean, it saddens me a bit, like I've the same thing was happening in Laos. I know, like they had really nice, beautiful old buildings over there, but they would prefer new concrete and new mass-produced material, which is just bad quality. Like a lot of like going on to another thing that I often like to whine about is like, I mean, to me it's a great thing that there are so many abandoned old cominkas, 150-year-old houses, again, sometimes made without a single nail, just exquisite wood workmanship, and traditional, it's got a like heart and soul and feeling. Like you can sit in a corner and just look at beams and interesting details and solutions of architecture, and just sort of never get bored. And then people are pulling those down, and they're building these houses that are so shit that they wouldn't be allowed in Sweden. One thing for the central heating reason, but like they're unisolated, and they look like hazardous just by the way they put together. Like they're model houses, but just I don't know, so much fakeness to it. Fake tiles, not real stone, imitation wood panels, imitation this or imitation that, and I just don't get it. You have the real deal. Why are you doing this to yourself? And a lot of it is also like systematic. It's not just that people think like this. It's also made. I talked to somebody, after the war with the occupation government, there was a big sort of trend to discredit the way houses are built before, And in a way, this was to enrich, of course, the big construction companies, which have, of course, again, a lot of connection to the Yakuza and organized crime and organized, political society as such, like higher society. And of course, the laws are there to favor their business, which is to say that old houses are, unsafe for earthquake, unsafe for this or unsafe for that. And whereas, their solution and their product is the safe one, it's the allowed one, it's the one that runs the smoothest through the bureaucracy of paperwork that needs to be done when construction is being put forward. And so, it's a system of forgetting, I guess. Or it's a system of, again, to a large extent, isolation, because the houses are built also in a way that isolates you from others. Whereas the older houses would sort of be more open. I remember when you talked about it in the Tale of Genji, how you have the way rooms are made and the way social space is made, and are there more entrances to the house, or is there a little terrace maybe, or a balcony, where you can just be in your whole house, but you're still sort of greeting the world at the same time. Whereas here it's it's closing you away from the outside world, and it's like, here's your space, this is your things, and the rest outside, the lines are starker, and the contrast is greater. But talking about onsen is a nice thing, of course. Because there all of a sudden it's the complete reverse, right? Like, you're naked together with people in a shower, and I think even most Westerners feel awkward about that. Not so much in Sweden. In Sweden we have a lot of public bathhouses, and you do spend a lot of time there with other people, naked together in the sauna and things like that. So, and in Sweden it's still quite common to have sort of unisex saunas as well, though you most of the time you would wear a towel. We even did that in school, like in high school. We would, sauna in school times, take sauna together with the, girls and boys mixed, and also mixed with those who aren't girls and boys. And that's a really nice thing to do. I like it a lot. Go to the onsen, go to the hot springs, especially if they're outside and you can sit and watch things in nature, and it's sort of it's just like watching the world as a movie somehow. If it's trees moving, birds flying around, and just the play of phenomenon. You open yourself up to it because you're treated by this very basic phenomenon of earth heated water sort of pleasing you, and you feel you're getting healthier just by being in it. And that sort of appreciation, I think, opens up for other kinds of appreciation. And because you're sort of put in a space where you're allowed to start thinking like that about nature. I think many times we would feel it's pretentious, like, who am I? Aristoteles, or what? Just walking around, or like Confucius walking around appreciating simple phenomena in this world. But yeah, at that time you really do feel like you ought to appreciate, you ought to like just sit there and look. Then you had another question which very much relates to what I was just talking to Wendy about, or answering Wendy. So I'll play that now.
Hello, Marcus. Hello, listeners. This is Fergal Schmoodlock of the Kingless Generation podcast. How about this? Here's a more complex question. In your recent series, you were highlighting the way that a lot of pseudoscientific, occult discourse veers in all kinds of Aryan directions while remaining very kind of scientific, pseudoscientific, and I might flip that question around and say, well, what about the way that occult philosophy in the early modern period actually gave birth to scientific discourse in the first place, right? You have, your Giordano Bruno, you got your John Dee. And before that, you have various Muslim thinkers, right? And they see the scientific enterprise as being of a piece with various occult inquiries. And the experimental method has a kind of ritual. It has a connection to ritual in the first place. So actually then the question becomes, what is it that allowed us to perceive a pure scientific discourse that does not have a ritual element, that does not have a psychoactive element, and does not have a political element for a while in the immediate past, in the high modern period? Or was it just the post-war?
This is, of course, a very interesting question. I think we should do a full episode or a series on it, you and me together. We talked about that before, going back to early ritual networks of social interaction, and how commodity circulation might have, or maybe not commodity, but at least sort of market product circulation, let's say that, where it quickly comes to an end, obviously, but sort of necromanced and kept alive by ritual. I have one good example though, and it's sort of like a twist, I think, to what you're saying. The example of Newton. I think many people are familiar with the fact that Newton was actually, for most of his life, interested in alchemy rather than being, the father of physics or astrophysics or, mechanized view of the universe. But if we do at the same time then the opposite, we go to the alchemical, which is, it's there the obvious. It's obvious that it has something to do with ritual, right? Like it fetishizes the ritual, and what science claims to get away from that. But if we don't look at alchemy that way, and we ask them what is the fixation, for example, with purity, and the fixation of metals, and how they interact with each other, then it becomes also sort of apparent that it has something to do with that almost magical force which releases then the product of the market. The early means of exchange, that you'll have metal as a means of exchange, right? Like a liquidation and an objectification, like a substantialization. There's a substance that replaces the human interaction and the ritual, or it aids it, maybe rather. It's a crutch to it. It is a crutch to very basic economic rituals and social interaction, haggling and discussing the value. It could be philosophical. It could be, and the introduction of metal as something approved by a social contract of accepting it as something, as worth something, leads the rituals and the social interaction in a specific direction. And when you look at Newton, most people don't know that one of the longest jobs that he had when he was sort of disillusioned with his own work is that he worked with exactly that. He worked for the Royal Minting Ministry, or whatever it was called in England at that time, dealing with forgery and dealing with the purity of the metal in the coins of the state, of the monarchy, and at the very heart of the magic of the proto-capitalist world, and he is even responsible, I think, for more than 24 death penalties, because that's the crazy thing. I think the last burning in English history is for forgery, and I think that's already it's the early 1800, I think, or maybe it's even towards the end of the 1800. I can't remember. And so Newton is, well, insofar as his accusation of forgery goes, he was responsible for more than 24 people, if I remember correctly, being put to the stake for forgery. And these are accusations based on his sort of semi-chemical, semi-alchemical ritual appreciation for purity of the object that is the coin. And so, I mean, talk about wizard, a dark wizard, right? Like that's some real necromantic shit. And yeah, I think I'll end with that, and then please take me up on this offer of doing something about the early rituals, and let's do that. Let's answer your question, your more advanced question together. I'm looking forward to doing that. Maybe this spring or something. We should really meet as well. we have the opportunity. We're not that far away from each other. So yeah, maybe find a good ritual place as well. Maybe let's go to a grave. Like maybe that old. This as well. That coins were existing in Japan. I think for centuries. I think we talked about that. I mean, centuries, but they weren't in circulation. They weren't used as a means of exchange. They were explicitly used as ritual objects for sacrifice and burials, and that's what coins were originally here. That's probably what coins were originally everywhere, or that's what we can discuss. That'd be awesome. We have to talk about those early shells as well, and how they appear in the kanji and the hanzi, and the where did the original shell coins come from that predates metal with millennia, probably. And that little capitalist monster, it really looks like a fucking alien creature that became the first means of exchange, and that replaced human social interaction for an alien false sense of secure value definition. Let's talk about that. All right. Bye. Thank you for your question. Have a good one. And so that's it, I think, for today's Q&A. A little bit shorter. The next one will be, I have a written answer to read, which is 2 or 3 times the length of the one I wrote today, or I had written for today, for Wendy. And that one's really exciting. We're gonna go back to China. We're gonna visit a time and place where the tables have turned. No longer anti-communist appropriation of mythology, but rather communist appropriation of mythology to overthrow the real vampires and the real gentry werewolves. So yes, very excited about that. I hope you are excited about that too, and I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has who's writing questions, and such a big thank you to all the new Patreons and everybody who keeps on being a Patreon. Shouldn't forget that. You're all making it seem possible that maybe by spring I can do this full time. I don't know, or at least I can, maybe I rearrange my life, as it were, to be able to put more effort into this show. We'll see about that, but if you're not a Patreon, please go to the Patreon and sign up. I mean, it's not a lot. It's like it's a beer. Buy me a beer. You just sat and listen to me for an hour and a half now, so you could buy me a beer. That'd be okay. Thank you. If you have the time, if you have the money, don't feel any pressure. See you all next time. Here is Bokuwa Shoto by one of my favorite Japanese musicians, Harumi Hosono. していきませんかそこに今座って
話を喋りましょうか。日のいずる国の、明日のことでも散歩がてらに歩きませんか。そこから立ち上がって服の裾でも払ってどんなところ歩きましょうか。日のいずる国の、輝く道でも道のぬかるみ入り日が移り黙りこくる夕焼けの午後、僕はちょっと笑うつもりです。黙